Welcome to Take the Lead Radio with Dr. Diane Hamilton, where she interviews some of the most successful leaders, entrepreneurs, authors, speakers, and other individuals who will inspire you to take the lead in your career and personal life. And now, here is Dr. Diane Hamilton.
I am here with Kate Adams, who's a storyteller. She believes everything's a story and your story is everything. I am really excited to have Kate Adams here. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Diane.
Well, you're welcome. I think I told you that I randomly found your TED Talk. I look for things that are based in curiosity, and I might have just pulled it up because I think you talked about curiosity and personal evolution and certain things in some of your work. And I'm watching your TED Talk, and I'm just sucked in from like the very first line, because you start with this story, and I'm like, what? As I'm listening, because it's just this unbelievable story, and everybody in the audience really took to it, and it was a really great TED Talk. If anybody hasn't looked up Kate Adams' TED, it is worth watching. It is wonderful. So you had spent 8 years as the assistant casting director at the Emmy winning As the World Turns before giving this talk. And can you just give a little bit of background on what you do, and then a little bit about what the TED Talk for larger than life lessons from soap operas and how you got into giving that?
Sure. So what I do is I think the best word or phrase that I most consistently hear is my background is non-traditional. That is the word that keeps popping up. And it really has been this curiosity-filled quest where I have just stepped through doors as they opened, and I see what I like and see what I don't, and pick up skills, and then evolve in my career from that. So I actually started as a local television news producer. I decided that was just not for me. It's a very specific environment. And I decided I really wanted to pursue this dream that I'd always had, which was working in entertainment. So that led me to make kind of a spur of the moment decision to move to New York. And I ended up in corporate events. And so I worked for a boutique agency, but we did events for Major League Baseball and IBM and the James Beard Awards. And we did all of these things. And so where I was no longer writing stories, I was telling stories through all these other means that you use when you're putting together an event. Food and decor, and what's our theme, and what's the entertainment going to be. So it really started to open my eyes to all the different ways that we tell stories in our lives. And from there, I really loved working with the talent. So I ended up getting a job at Warner Brothers Television Studios as a casting coordinator. And that in turn led to As the World Turns for 8 years, where I was the assistant casting director. And I had a long history of watching soap operas. And if as somebody who's seen the TED Talk, a little bit about that. But as the youngest of 7 children, my sister's the oldest. There are 5 boys and then me. So, my sister got married when I was in first grade. We didn't have a whole lot of things in common, but soaps for us were the common thread. And so that I really loved that whole experience, and working with all the different departments and seeing what it takes to mount that whole production and create 250 episodes a year. Wow. But when the show was canceled, there was a real shift in my life. The day after CBS canceled the show, my son was 6 months old at the time, and he was diagnosed with the swine flu. It was during the H1N1 epidemic. And we realized just how isolated we were. We were in the middle of New York City, but we did not have the family and friends support network there to have both of us at the hospital at the same time. My husband had to be at home with our daughter, and it was just like, I'm ready for something different. So I went back to like really I started doing this analysis of what is it that I love, and do I have to be in this industry or could I be somewhere else? And still pull that storytelling thread, which was the thing that I love. I get really excited talking about story. And so I just decided, you know what, we're going to move closer to family and we're going to find something that where I can do this in a different way. And so I ended up going to work for UPS. So I was writing a blog at the time, and someone saw my blog and hired me to be the voice of their online marketing content. And that turned into a wonderful 6 years where I worked with a tribe of fantastic people and learned so much and learned things, that I never would have thought that I would be interested in had I, if somebody had just said, do you think you'd like to work for a transportation and logistics company? I probably would have been like, I'll pass. But I was like, I don't know, like, let me see. And just being open to that and really understanding that there is a much broader scope of things that I'm interested in that I might not have just ever had that visibility into before. And while I was at UPS, they started a content partnership with the TED Institute. And so they opened, they were accepting applications from all global employees, and UPS has like 440,000 plus employees, to submit their ideas. And they had a theme, and it was what if. And my idea that I came up with, like, what if we could actually learn from soap operas? And I just thought it was hilarious to me because everyone would say, oh, where'd you work last? And I'd say, As the World Turns. And they would just look at me cockeyed, like, what?
Interesting change. Yeah.
So that's what led me to TED. And from there, I actually went and worked for a company called BAMTech, which has now been acquired by Disney. And I was embedded on a team of data engineers and machine learning PhDs to be the storyteller for that team. So as I continue to evolve my experiences and the settings and locales and the skill set, I think it's so frequently we tell ourselves, I'm not sure. And if I'm not sure about it, then I'll just say no, instead of saying, I'm not sure, so why not? And that's worked very well for me, I can say.
That's an interesting background. And, I think that I love that you asked the questions. I mean, because my work's all based around my book and information about curiosity. And you started off saying your curiosity filled quest. And I love that. And that's what attracted me to watching your talk to begin with. And as I'm watching you, I'm thinking, wow, you're a very attractive woman. And I'm thinking, why weren't you on As the World Turns as a star? And, you have this ability to act so well. I was trying to figure out, how did you memorize that story at the beginning? I mean, how hard was that to do? Because I'm just going, wow, that went so smoothly, and that would be really hard to memorize.
So yes, I did memorize it. I memorized the whole talk. But that TED Talk was actually my very first public speaking engagement ever.
Wow.
No.
Way to knock it out of the park. Yeah.
Well, thank you. But, I as somebody who identifies as a storyteller, I believe that we crave story in our lives, that we tell stories to connect with other people. And we also tell ourselves stories to understand the truth of the matter, the how and the why things happen. And, I want to be honest as we go into this conversation. You ask, well, why was I never on screen? And we can get into a long conversation about talent and training and, all of that kind of stuff. But a way where I can talk now very specifically about bravery and standing up and fighting for things that may have long odds.
Mm-hmm.
For a long time, I was the thing that I needed to fight against. I was the thing standing in my own way. And so where I dreamed of being an actor, it wasn't something I pursued because I just kept telling myself it wasn't realistic. It wasn't possible.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that was, I was, in my TED Talk, I talk about this very famous scene of Erica Kane in All My Children,
Mm-hmm.
shouting down a grizzly bear and scaring it away. And, for a good chunk of my life, I was my own grizzly bear. And I think so many of us find ourselves in that situation.
Yeah, and it can be also a learning experience in a way that I think that different. Maybe you are destined to, because you could do so much more with your storytelling than instead of reading somebody else's story. And I think that your storytelling is what makes for a really great speaker. And I know that's what you do now. And I know that you really have a unique way of telling different stories. And what you did in your TED Talk was give an example of what we see in a soap opera. And it made me think, as I was watching that, it kind of brought back, and I'm older than you are, so I went way back to when Carol Burnett used to have her As the Stomach Turns. They made a little play on As the World Turns. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do, in fact. And Carol was a huge soap opera fan. And I believe she appeared on All My Children.
Oh, she did?
So,
oh, that's funny.
Yes, she was a huge fan of All My Children.
She used to do a really funny, over the top parody of it on her show. But I mean, we have modern day soap operas that maybe people don't even think of as soap operas. To me, like Lost and Breaking Bad or whatever, to me it's a soap opera because I'm tuning in to see where it goes, right? And
oh yeah.
Do you have like a favorite that soap opera or a show like that you just have to watch? I mean, are you a binge watcher? I mean,
so that question is funny in a couple of ways. One is that I think my favorite soap opera right now is Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And if anyone questions my diagnosis of Game of Thrones as a soap opera, all I have to say is the last episode we saw, while we continue to sit in this huge lull of a cliffhanger, had one of the soapiest tropes ever, with a genetic reveal, and
yeah.
So much of television has become serialized, and so there are these, Scandal is another show that to me had a lot of soap opera elements to it. The Good Wife is another one that I loved, and I actually watched as a binge. Because my children were very small when it was just coming on. And so I chose sleep over television at that time. But
I hear you.
Yeah. So I think there are definitely elements of what people call soaps in many of the shows that are on air today or, online.
Right.
And I think that the binging is because people... people will hold off on watching the show because they don't want to have any gaps in between episodes, because they don't want to have to suffer through those cliffhangers.
I know.
Like waiting till next week, or they'll just wait and watch it all in one go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I did that with Lost for like the first few seasons, and then I was like, then I was in the middle of it, and I used to get so bummed I had to wait another, 3 months or whatever it was till it started up again. And but there are a lot of interesting, and I did like The Good Wife. I like The Good Fight. I like all the ones you're talking about. And I think that there's the cliffhangers, though, you say that we see, they have parallels in real life, and I'm curious what you meant by that.
So, there were two specific incidents that actually helped me kind of come up with this idea of parallels between soap operas and real life. And one was I had a meeting with my boss's boss, actually, and it was a follow-up meeting. And as we're in this follow-up meeting, he's talking to me. He remembers nothing of the earlier meeting. He's like a totally different person. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm talking to the evil twin who is impersonating the guy I talked with last time.
Because evil twin. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I'm sure he was just having a bad day, but I was like, how do you justify that he didn't remember anything? It's because, so there was that one. And then there was, it was a Friday afternoon, and I found out something, like I discovered that I had made a mistake, and it was right before the end of the work week. And there was nothing I could do that day to fix it. And I had to wait till Monday to talk to somebody and say, hey, just want to let you know this happened. We need to do this in order to, fix it. And it wasn't the end of the world, but in my head I think because I had to wait that, Friday night, Saturday, Sunday until Monday morning to resolve the situation, it was a cliffhanger. And so the drama kept building and building. And as I was sitting in horrible, horrible Atlanta traffic, with nothing to take my mind off of it except, just hyper focusing on this mistake that, again, I don't even remember what it was. So it was relatively minor. But I was focusing, and I was somewhat catastrophizing, like, oh my gosh, I've made a mistake, and how is this going to look on my review? And, I was imperfect. And I thought, it's kind of like the Friday afternoon cliffhanger where you'd see the heroine driving down the road at high speed, and then suddenly lights would flash and she'd veer off the road, and you heard a car, you heard the sound of like wreckage.
Right.
And then you'd tune in on Monday, and she'd be in the hospital, and her makeup would be perfect, and she'd have a little bandage around her head, but other than there was no damage, no real lasting damage. And I just thought, what if I could stop living in fear of the cliffhanger? Yeah. What if I could just, step back and realize that, it's all going to play out in its own time, and just keep breathing and keep moving. So I do think there is this, people want to be in control of their own lives. And when you have a cliffhanger, it's where you lose that element of control. You're forced to wait. And so frequently we are impatient.
Oh, yeah.
And, we want instant gratification, not just when we're ordering something online and we want it here immediately, but, we want to watch this thing immediately. We don't want to wait through commercials. Everything has become this condensed life, where we are trying to eliminate any sort of cliffhanger or wait at all.
Yeah, and a lot of what you talked about in terms of fear of things we think are going to happen, and we don't want to live through the time of waiting. I had someone on the show recently who cited a study that 85% of what we fear won't even happen. So you're going to end up with a Band-Aid on your head. You didn't smash the tree, and 85% of the time, right? So
yeah.
And so, but you talk about 4 larger than life lessons from soap operas, and as we talk about this, what you just gave as an example, can you share what are those 4? All, list them all.
So yes, the 4 that I talk about in my TED Talk are surrender is not an option, and that's when there is an object or an objective that you seek. Obstacles are always going to be somewhere on our horizon. They crop up every day in ways that we anticipate and can't anticipate. And we have the option to either accept that obstacle or to overcome it, to, go around or through, but to overcome that obstacle. And that's what I was talking about earlier with the example of Erica Kane and the grizzly bear.
Right.
But those complications crop up in all of our lives. And so frequently we determine the size and shape of it based on our perspective and how we frame it. So really understanding what it is that's important to you, what it is that you seek. And it's not the plan that's the thing, it's the goal and achieving the goal. So that's the first one. Surrender is not an option. The second one is sacrifice your ego. And this one people tend to find amusing and ironic because soap operas tend to be filled with, very egotistical characters. But there is, our egos and our desire to look right and perfect and strong all the time can actually inhibit our ability to connect with other people. So it really speaks to the need for vulnerability, for acceptance of, I made a mistake, I'm sorry. So one of the, the example I use in the TED Talk is Howard Schultz when he came back to Starbucks after I think it was an 8-year period where he stepped down as CEO and the company went through some hardships, and he came back and he said, I'm sorry. And, he apologized to every single employee. I mean, it's hard enough for me to say, I'm sorry to my daughter, when I snap, at her, and it's not, I'm just having a bad day, but saying I'm sorry to a group of people like that you feel responsibility for. So that level of responsibility taking, of acceptance, of, imperfection. And, that is really, that vulnerability fuels our ability to connect with other people and to also live in what Brene Brown would call a more wholehearted fashion. The third lesson is evolution is real. And this goes along with the soap opera tradition of recasting characters, where you'll tune in Monday and you'll then tune back in on Tuesday, and it's the same character, but they have a different face. And today, the role of Brad Snyder is being played by
Darren,
Austin Peck.
Yeah. Bewitched. All of them, they're different, huh?
Yes. And, and as someone who was in casting and needed to recast a character that was beloved by the audience, you have to really think about what's important to the character. Is it the way the person looks, or is it who, the character is deep down and what we want this character to do and how they function in the larger, landscape and tapestry of the show? And so I think sometimes we hold on to ideas of who we are that are out of sync with who we actually are now. And I've seen this time and again, specifically with knowing so many actors, people who realize they no longer love acting, but they don't want to give it up because that's how they've self-identified for so long. And it's understanding that we evolve sometimes out of pace with our, the logical side of our selves, and the need for curiosity and evolution. And there is this element of if the character does not evolve, there is stagnation there. And then ultimately the audience becomes disengaged because it's the same thing, different day. And we do that ourselves in everyday life. If you wake up and do the exact same thing every day, your brain starts to chunk. Like, have you ever driven down the road and you get to your destination and you think, I don't remember driving the last 5 miles.
Yeah, definitely.
I hope I was safe, but you become so, you become less aware of what you're doing because it's just, you're living by rote memory. And so your brain just chunks that whole thing out and you don't even have to think about it anymore. And to me, that's not how I want to live my life. And I think we find ourselves more engaged in our own lives when we continue to evolve and pursue these things that make us curious and spark our imaginations and really fuel our own personal evolution. And the fourth lesson is resurrection is possible. And that really goes to one of the things. My dad really hated how much time I spent watching soap operas, and he would just talk about how ridiculous they are. And I thought he died. And well, yes, he did die, but now he's back. And
now we have parallel universes, so they can really have that flashbacks.
Yeah, there is a long history of characters returning from the dead. And, for quite a bit of my writing time as I prepared for this TED Talk, I was planning to actually speak about my oldest nephew, Bobby, who at the age of 24 was in a tragic car accident, and he is now a quadriplegic. And there was there were so many obstacles in his way. And from the outside, like from my perspective, I could so easily see, somebody thinking, well, that's it. Like, this is my life now. But never once did I see him take that route. And he ended up going back to college. He ended up getting married. He has a beautiful little girl. Like, his life has continued to grow and evolve in a way that, so many people are thinking, that tragedy, that life is over, but it fueled this new life. And I found it so incredibly inspiring. And so I was planning on actually talking about Bobby and the lessons I learned from watching him. And the people at TED were like, that it's a great story, but we think that you have a story as well, and that it might make more impact sharing your own story. So it really kind of took me back to that place of vulnerability where I had to walk the talk of what I was saying and share what was one of, if not the most vulnerable times in my life, which was I was unemployed for 9 months between As the World Turns and UPS. And I was scared. I couldn't get an interview. People would talk to me and say, well, you have such an interesting background. Somebody is going to be so lucky to have you on their team, but no one, I would be like, I try to tee them up with, well, I could do this or I could do this. And I have all these transferable skills. And they'd say, like, yeah, you do. But they couldn't quite get to seeing how I could help them. And having 2 small children, living with my in-laws and trying to figure out how to parent in what felt like a fishbowl, and feeling like every day I was just encountering rejection. It really did feel like a death to me, because I had given up the Kate that I thought existed. I was, New York casting director working in the entertainment industry. And now I was just one more unemployed mom living in an in-law's home during, the recession in 2010. And, my story was not singular by any means, but when you're in those troughs, it can so often feel like you are the only one who's going through that. And so I feel like these lessons layer on one another, because that one to me is inextricably tied to vulnerability and the need to share that. And only through my sharing that and asking for help was I able to receive help. And then it was gratifying for me to share that story and then be contacted by people from all over the world, like literally messages from China and Iran. Wow. And, about people thanking me for sharing that story. How, there was one person who said, whenever I'm feeling down, I watch your TED Talk, which that to me made it worth it, because it was terrifying for me to stand on that stage and tell that story, because I was telling it in front of my entire chain of management up to the CEO, and talking about how I felt unemployable. No one, and in the back of my head, I'm telling myself this story of, what if they rethink my employment here? What if they think, wait, why do we pay this soap opera chick here? But I think that.
But when they started cheering, I'm sure that everybody was laughing, and at your story, it was so great. I'm sure you were going, "Oh, thank God!" Right?
Well, at that point in the delivery, I think I was in a fugue state. Like, when it was over, I didn't even know. I couldn't. I was there. I had reached this level of, I guess, separation between the body that was on stage and my mind, because I was like, did I drop whole sections of my text? People ask, do they have teleprompters? And no, they don't.
Yeah.
And tough. So it was just, I really went into it with, it was a very emotional sort of thing. And I think that's why public speaking can be tremendously challenging, especially for people who are not, they don't become immediately oriented toward that being something that they want to do. And that was me. I took Latin because it's a dead language and I didn't want to speak in class. So, so getting up on that stage was challenging for me, but like with anything else, the more you do something, the easier it becomes. And there were things, the interpersonal exchange, almost the live theater element of it, to me was gratifying. And if you listen carefully at the very end, you can hear people in the audience, saying amen, and really responding to it. So,
yeah, well, as you said that, it reminded me all those things. I think a lot of us who speak can relate to about, did I really say what I wanted to say? Did I forget entire parts? And I remember speaking for Forbes. I was on stage, and I remember getting up, and I was one of my jobs was teaching for Forbes, but I also taught for 7 other schools. And when I introduced myself, I could not remember if I told the right school and all of a sudden I got this look on my face, like I just stopped dead. I could remember thinking, oh, please have said the right school for where I work, right? Because these are the people who hired you for this. And you get these moments, and I think I did. I never saw, when they video, when I saw the video later, that part wasn't even in it. So maybe I said the wrong thing. I don't know. But, you get up there and you think, oh, please don't say something stupid. We don't want to be, we have the sense of needing to be perfect. We want to do, have it be as good as it can be. And we tend to be our worst enemies. And I saw in some of the notes you sent to me about, you discuss imposter syndrome, perfectionism, and all that kind of stuff, and how it relates to evil twins. And I gotta know, with the evil twin, how does that relate to that?
So the evil in soap operas, twins are never just twins. There's always, they're the exact opposite of each other.
Right.
One is everything kind and good and loving, and the other is dark and twisty and right. manipulative. And in real life, we're not one side of the coin or the other. We are the whole coin. And so we have to learn how to live with the duality of our personalities. We're not always going to be kind. Sometimes we will snap at someone, and maybe we'll be a little cross. Sometimes, the poop rolls downhill and we say, we take out frustrations on someone else. Or, we're not always. There's, very frequently, especially with female twins on a soap opera, one will, be dressed a little more promiscuously than the other. And the other will be, Susie Homemaker kind of thing.
All right.
And I feel like there is certainly an element of the imposter syndrome, because with twins on soaps, there is, the evil twin is usually at some point trying to pass him or herself off as the good one. And so frequently I have found myself in situations where I think, okay, I'm going to put on my armor today. I'm going to, this is the outfit I'm going to wear, and this is how I'm going to do my hair, and I'm going to do my makeup, and I'm going to walk in there. I'm going to have the appropriate level of gravitas, and I am going to say this and that, and it's all going to go to this plan because that's who they expect. That's the good twin. And, when something kind of, something falls apart within that, whether it's a small chink in the armor or a bigger one, it can lead to this sort of shame spiral of it didn't go as planned, or it wasn't just perfect. And I feel like there is this Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook element to it, to our lives, that we've started incorporating really broadly, and not just on social media, where we feel like we have to present just the best parts of ourselves.
Filter.
And
Yeah.
that ultimately just leads us to feel shameful when we don't live up to that all the time. So we just, we curate our lives so that we look #blessed and make everything look like we're #winning. And then ultimately we find ourselves sitting at home staring at a device, and we feel like a big #fail. And it's, there is this photoshopped element of our life. And so I feel like there is this authenticity that I crave. And I talk to loads of other people, and they seem to crave it too. They want that authenticity from their leaders. And that's even something that I was just listening to a political conversation yesterday. I live in Georgia, and the Democratic gubernatorial candidate, Stacey Abrams, she is in debt to the IRS. And in other political cycles or other races, that may be a liability to someone depending on how you approach it. But she has approached it very much, with accountability, as she has explained, the choices that she made to defer tax payments so that she could help her parents in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. And, but she's been very upfront about it. She hasn't tried to deflect. She hasn't tried to, airbrush the situation. She's been very honest about it. And people are finding that, really impressive in a way that, yes, it makes her seem even more like us. Yeah. Sometimes, she has education loans that she owes money on. She chose to do this instead of that. I've been in a similar situation. It makes her more human. And, so frequently, and politics is just another great soap opera. Yeah. But, so frequently we try to airbrush or distract or, say, well, don't look over here. Look at this, or airbrush something to make it look other than it as it is. And so to me, I just found that, especially in today's age where we try to minimize anything that doesn't look perfect, I found that really compelling. And that to me is storytelling. That is part of who she is, and the story that she is sharing with, the Georgia voters.
Well, it's interesting to see how people either embrace all aspects and show more of themselves, or try to filter out some of what they do. I just talked to a salesperson this week who I know pretty well, who I knew wanted to sell me something. And when you saw the really nice side of the coin until I said I wasn't interested in that, then it started to spin over to the other side a little bit. And, you get an image of somebody and you think, oh, they're this way, but everybody's got both sides of the coin, like you said. And I think that a lot of us, it's hard to live up to what everybody else is showing as this perfect thing to be with social media. And it's, and I think it's really important that you use examples from soap operas to point out these things. It's because we can relate to it. And you also pointed out another part of soap operas, which I found interesting, about negative assumptions we make about them, and sometimes you hear soap operas and you don't always think of the highest level of television. You know what I mean? And before you answer that, do they use teleprompters? Do these people memorize all this stuff, or they just...
No, these actors are like the Olympic athletes of actors. They memorize it all.
Wow.
At least on As the World Turns. I can't speak for other shows, but they memorized it all. There were actors on our show who would some days have 40 pages of dialogue a day, and they might work 4 days that week. So imagine learning 160 pages of dialogue in a week. And it's not like you reuse that.
Right.
You recycle it when it's it's done. So yes, and the complexity of acting on a daytime drama is amped up because of the production schedule. So on our show, we had an executive producer who was incredibly efficient. And so we could shoot 100 pages of dialogue in an 8:30 a.m. to like 5 p.m. day, with a break for lunch. Plus, it's a union set, so you would have your morning break and your afternoon break. But that meant like you had to really quickly learn your blocking, which is where you stand and where you cross. And you have 3, sometimes 4 cameras shooting you at the same time, so you have to really hit your marks. And all the lighting is on a grid above you. So that has to be just perfect. It's not like shooting primetime or a feature where they break down lights and camera in between each shot, to make sure that everything is just perfect. And, on a feature film, they might shoot 2 pages of dialogue a day. So seeing people that dedicated to the craft of it and to the of creating that much story in a year, but yes, there are the negative assumptions were definitely things that I ran into just telling people, where do you work? I work at As the World Turns. Oh, or things like that. But as I prepared for TED, and the TED Institute curator definitely gave me a little heads up about the normal TED audience. And if you look at the comments on my TED Talk, and God forbid, if you look at the comments on my TED Talk on YouTube, you will definitely see, that there were some assumptions made about certain things, and usually about the audience of soap operas, where the assumptions tend to be that they're very passive. They're women who just sit on their couches and eat bonbons. And yes, to this day, that's still an assumption and stereotype made about, I had to look up what a bonbon was. Because
I'm old enough to remember eating them.
So there is this, stereotype of a very passive audience that's not very intellectual, and they're highly dramatic in their own lives. And that's, if you take any cross section of the world, you're going to find people that fit that. But really what makes soap opera fans is their activity, not their passivity, because they do become really invested in these people who come into their living rooms day after day, 5 days a week. So, now we have celebrity couples that are like super couples. Well, super couples started with Luke and Laura. That is a daytime soap Genesis story.
Right.
is the super couple. And now they, there's this fan worship for all sorts of primetime shows and really celebrated shows. But that sort of fandom, to me, is really born from the daytime drama fans. And just the cross section of it. immediately after giving the talk, I went, or, the TED talk, I went to a reception and someone came up to me and said, my mother-in-law, who is this, intellectual Upper East Sider in Manhattan, never misses her shows.
Yeah.
And, I think there are a lot more people who maybe they don't watch today, but did watch at some point that you might never guess, but there is a shame and a stigma attached to it. And so I think that was part of my desire to really kind of give this love letter to daytime. And also, my dad, as I mentioned, he used to nag me. He's like, you're wasting your life. And watching the show. And, when I started working at As the World Turns, he started watching it, and he became such a fan. We named a character after him. And yeah, I mean, it wasn't a major character, but he just got such a kick out of that. And as he was literally dying, he said, well, what's going to happen to Henry? And I said, well, I only know the next 6 weeks of story. And I told him what was going to happen. But I was like, I'll keep you informed. So I think it's just people see things there that resonate with them. And so, for instance, Henry was somebody who loved his martinis and had a dry wit. And that was how my dad saw himself. And so that was, that became his favorite character.
That's awesome.
We see these things in whatever story we see across whatever screen of whatever size that we're looking at. And the things that hook our curiosity are the things that resonate with us. And then, it could be something fantastical, which soap operas so frequently are, but there is a kernel of truth there at the heart of it. And I really feel like these soap opera characters are maybe, it's like they're on a continuum, like this Russian doll continuum of, they're the biggest doll, and they, you can see their features the best, but the size and the shape of them and the design of them is the same as, the smaller versions, which we are, some of us more than others. Certainly, I wouldn't say somebody like Oprah Winfrey was a very, the tiniest doll nestled inside of the Matryoshka, but there is that kernel of truth there, and that's really what I was trying to crack open and share.
Well, when you talk about fantastical, and it just brought to mind Modern Family. I'm sure you've probably seen the episode where they did it coincide with the Hispanic soap opera. If you haven't seen it, it's hysterical. I mean, they take the whole episode and it kind of mimics what you would see in a Hispanic soap opera, and their life kind of parallels it in an over-the-top way. And I thought it was really creative. Have you seen that by chance?
I have not seen that episode, but one of
great.
My favorite shows. Have you ever seen Jane the Virgin?
I haven't, but I've heard great things. Did they do the same kind of thing?
Well, it's there is a, there's a show within a show. One of the characters is a telenovela star, and so many plot lines within the show are similar to telenovela storylines, but there is very much a heart there, which is family. And in Modern Family, obviously you can tell by the title, and in every soap opera or telenovela, the family is really the heart of it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's so many great things that you can pull out from just what you've said here, and from, different really well-written shows like Modern Family or whatever, where they kind of show us how we are part of these characters. And I guess the one thing you did also send me that I wanted to ask you about that we could get from it is soap opera Amnesia. What's the real world equivalent of that one?
So soap opera amnesia is not like real world amnesia. Soap opera amnesia is you fall down the stairs and you hit your head and you forget everything for a short period of time.
Right.
And then it all comes flooding back. And this bump on the head usually coincides with some very dramatic thing that you're about to do. And you've made a decision in your life and you're going to break up your marriage, or you're going to go do this, or, and, what the amnesia actually does is put a pin in that story, and then it allows you to go someplace totally different, like that didn't even exist. And I think what I believe the real world equivalent of soap opera amnesia is when we just decide, I'm not dealing with that. I'm just going to pretend that didn't exist, and I'm going to put it in a box. I'm going to put that box at the top of my mental closet, and we're just going to ignore it instead of dealing with the sort of messy truth and inevitable complications. And the thing about soap opera amnesia is that somebody always remembers, and it's always so much worse than dealing with things head on.
Yeah.
Because the time that elapses, it allows things to build in dramatic ways. And, we think on some level we've escaped. Like I got away with it. I didn't have to deal with it. I just ignored it. I buried my head in the sand and it worked. And I have yet to stumble across an occasion where, just putting a pin in something and moving in a totally different, direction and expecting that thing that I buried is going to stay buried. It's never made the situation better.
Right.
So,
well,
it amps up the drama. And no matter how hard we may try to live undramatic lives, that's what life is.
Yeah, and
life is drama.
Gotta really face it. And thinking of not really facing it makes me think of that Brooke Shields on the Friends episode where she thought Joey was really Draco Mori. I don't know if you saw that, but that's one of it was really. She did a great job. Over the top acting of just blurring the lines of reality and soap operas. And there's so many great examples out there, and you had so many. Really great examples in your talk and what you've shared here. And I think so many people could really benefit from watching that TED Talk and hiring you to speak, by the way, because I mean, if you start your talk just with that same story every time, I would listen, like you said, the person who listens to the TED Talk to cheer up, I was just mesmerized, and I'm sure everybody else will be. So I was wondering if you could share a link if people wanted to find you. Is it kateadamsmedia.com, or did you have another link, or how can they find you?
Well, first of all, thank you. And secondly, yes, that is my website is kateadamsmedia.com. So Kate, Kate, Adams, Adams, media.com. And there are request information buttons on there. Or you could just direct email me at info at kateadamsmedia.com.
Well, Kate, this is so fascinating, and I'd be afraid to give another TED Talk if I were you, because I don't know how you'd start it. That could be any better than that last
Well, I'm not sure I could do it on soap operas, but there are loads of other things in the world that inspire me and make me curious. So maybe one day.
Well, I look forward to it, and thank you so much for being on the show. I really enjoyed it.